And welcome everyone to the last installment of our NAfME Orchestra Town Halls. These have been tremendous to present and to be a part of and to watch. I've gone back and rewatched episode 1 and 2 on mission and models just to get my head on straight for today. We will be talking methods and materials, and we have a rock star, all-star cast of characters to talk to you today about this topic of what do I select to put in front of my students and how do I deliver it. Uh, but I just want to quickly get the frame of reference for everyone about how we got to this meeting. So mission, we've talked about why do we do what we do as strings teachers, as music educators? How do we select a mission that is right for our community? And models is broadly, what does it look like in our classroom? How do our procedures, as well as, do we have two violins, viola, cello, bass sitting in an arc? Is that something that we want to perpetuate? Is that something that works for our community, or do we need to look at alternatives? And now we're talking about, we've made these decisions, we're in our community, we've determined the best course of action moving forward for the model in our community and the mission that we want to achieve with our students and our instruction. And now we need to decide what repertoire, what materials do I use to enact that mission with my students. So we have 6 guests today. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves as we go through each of the questions. So we're going to start with Renee Harris, and I would love to hear, please describe the significance of the materials you choose to put in front of your students.
All right, well, thank you all for having me. My name is Renee Harris. I am a string specialist for Spokane Public Schools. I've been in this particular role for 5 years, and before that, I was in the Bethel School District in Tacoma on the west side of Washington for 8 years. I'm also currently on the conducting staff with the Spokane Youth Symphony, and I conduct the Youth Sinfonietta, which is the middle school-ish level group of our organization. I am obsessed with middle school. I love being a middle school teacher. I think that middle school is basically sonata allegro form, like 6th grade exposition, we're out, we're figuring stuff out. 7th grade development, key changes in your voice, weird stuff happens, we experiment, we figure stuff out. And then 8th grade, the recapitulation and the exposition comes back, but you've got baggage and you've been through some stuff and you're ready to move on to the next thing. And so I really just enjoy teaching middle school. The school that I teach at is a self-contained gifted and talented program. It's a public school. The students do have to test in to go there, and we're grades 4 through 8. In 5th grade, they begin instrumental courses and they have to choose an instrument. And so I've finally don't have to do so much recruiting. I just have to get them to choose strings as opposed to band, which is a different game than driving to every school and doing the whole dog and pony show, as we all know about. Our population, again, is gifted and talented or highly capable, whatever word you want to use. And we have quite a large group of students who are twice exceptional. And if you're not familiar with that term, or like me, you had to hear it 10 to 14 times to really understand it. Twice exceptional means that there are challenges with learning, executive functioning, production, or social things. It can also mean that there's a disability that masks the student's ability. And even more difficult, there's an ability that masks a student's disability. And so having this information definitely guides how I choose the materials and how I present those materials to my students. There has to be a really strong connection between the curriculum and the instructional approach, and that has to be different for each student. And so we do a lot of interdisciplinary approaches to find the connections between things. We ask tons of questions. We're really big on inquiry. And then in order to get the students to engage with that learning, finding their passion areas, helping them identify their own strengths, or helping them speak for the strengths that they've identified forever that the adults just can't see. And then having those enrichment experiences to synthesize it all together. And of course, before we can even do that, there has to be that safe space where they feel comfortable showing up as themselves. And middle school obviously is the best place to feel comfortable showing up as yourself. We all know how difficult that can be. And so I can't do much about that bottom layer of Maslow's hierarchy without stepping over some boundaries, but I can meet them in that middle of friendship, of love and belonging, of family, of connection. And the orchestra, the ensemble is the place to find that, I think. And that's such a magical place for middle schoolers to be, where they can connect with others. Of course, on the flip side of that, there's the anxiety, there's the sensitivity, there's, and in our cases, the excitability too. All those things just blending together in that wonderful middle school soup. And so talking about materials, this year has been such a blessing in a weird way, because we don't have, or at least we haven't had performances, and we haven't had this normal conveyor belt situation of pass out the music, learn it, maybe do something fun in the middle, perform it, and then start over. It's been, it's taken for me the yoke off, and I get to really be more, to teach with more fidelity to my mission in the first place, which is growing potential for my students, developing curiosity, and finding joy in what we do. And when I think of a concert, I don't necessarily think about developing curiosity or finding joy. I do think about growing potential through the music that we choose. And so moving away from this rehearsal process, performance, rinse, repeat 3 to 4 to 6 times, depending on your school, we get to just do more that relates to the student. I think that curiosity for me is a moral position. True curiosity, authentic curiosity is a moral statement, especially in today's society. And curiosity helps us approach uncertainty with a positive attitude. And when we have that true curiosity, not suspicion, not leading questions, not closed-ended questions where we already know the answer, but we say, like, where does this come from you, for you? What is important to you? Why? Who told you? Figuring out for these students, what do you want to do? What do you want to learn, and why? Or why don't you want to do, and why don't you want to learn? And how can we help you get to where you want to be? A lot of that in the orchestral setting for me comes back to this idea of creative mortification, where at some point somebody killed your creativity. And now the only way that's safe to be creative is to have a formula. Somebody, please just tell me how to be creative. Just tell me what to do. And especially with gifted and talented students, they're so used to having the right answer. And in this case, there isn't necessarily a right answer. So the materials for me this year we've been really heavy on the improvisation. We've been really heavy on composition, on and not just putting notes in Noteflight or putting notes on paper, but also putting together products that are reflective of who we are. And I'm just going to share one quick project that I did, and then I'll pass it off to the next person. I wanted to figure out, how are we going to do solo ensemble without doing solo ensemble? What do we get from solo ensemble? We put kids together and we say, here's the stuff, do something with it. I can't spoon feed you. I can't help you every step of the way. You're going to present this and you're going to get feedback. And this was all when we were online. And so we did a musical storybook project. And we said, what makes a good story? What makes good music? Who's your audience? And let's put this together. Students in groups of 4 or 5, small ensembles. There has to be an editor. There has to be an artist. There has to be a narrator. And there has to be somebody to record music. And then there has to be an executive producer that ties it all together. And this was the most fun I've had in a really long time as a teacher, because the kids got to bring their own experience, their own passions. If they weren't necessarily a strong musician, but they're a strong artist, they got to show up in that different way. And they got to show who they were without having to show it this way, because not all of them can do that. I'm the kind of person that they probably invented beta blockers for, but I've never tried them. And I'm feeling in this moment like I should have taken some, because I'm getting to the ramble moment. I think the importance of the materials that anybody puts in front of their kids is that it has to be something that is meaningful. When we deal with underachievement in students, it's so often because they don't see that what they're being asked to do is meaningful. And we have to find the things that will be meaningful for them. Meaning is subjective, meaning is personal. And if we can meet the students where they are, create a safe space for them to show up, then we're going to be able to find those meaningful things that allow them to grow their potential, to find joy, and to develop their curiosity about the world. So I'll pause there.
There's so much to unpack there, and I think we're going to get to a discussion here pretty soon. But we need to pass it off now to someone who pretty much takes up half of one of my shelves in my music library, Deborah Baker Monday. I cannot believe that we have someone so huge in the industry of strings teaching here to talk to us about methods and materials. And I imagine materials in particular, because your materials are something that I choose to put in front of my students consistently. So Deborah, please take it away, introduce yourself, and please tell us the significance of the materials we choose to put in front of our students.
Well, thank you, Nathan, so much for those kind words. I'm Deborah Baker Monday, and my approach is so different from Geraldine's. I'm 5 years retired now, but for 25 years, I was in a pretty much traditional string teaching program with the mission to develop players who could perform in an orchestra. That's how it started, just training beginning string students. I started teaching in 4th through 8th grade in Utah. That's what I was doing for the last 25 years. We start beginners in the 4th grade in the district where we had 6 elementary schools and 1 middle school. There were 3 of the teachers for the elementaries, and we all correlated everything because we would have combined concerts for Christmas and then in the spring with a huge festival with the elementaries performing together, and then the middle school grades performing one after the other, and then the high school. And we liked the parents to see the growth of the whole program from the beginners into how they end up at the high school doing fabulous music. So my mission, of course, was to just try to train the students using tools that I had learned over the years that I liked. And we had certain procedures that we all followed in our schools. We used a method book for our beginners. We would choose a book 1, and we tried to get through half of book 1 in the 4th grade, and then we would try to finish the other half in the 5th grade. And then when we got to middle school, and it was pretty much the 6 schools would come together, and we had 2 6th grade classes divided by level. So we had low and high strings together, and then we had kind of a remedial class for the high strings. So it was like 6 different groups coming in to join one boat. So that was very tricky, especially with that middle school age. 6th grade. But the neat thing is that the 6th graders came in, and the one place where they knew people was when they came to orchestra. They were like, oh, here's my friends, and here's my teachers that I've had for the last 2 years. So that was also just a wonderful feeling. So we would go on to the book 2 of the method book, and then progress into the book 3 in 7th grade, I believe, and 8th grade. But all along the way, of course, when I would encounter issues with my students, I would create an exercise, of course, to try to focus on a weakness or something, and rhythmic things. So I would create those things. But some of those things I created along the way, I started to do consistently with all my beginners. I drew upon things that I had learned, like even as an undergrad, I found things that I like to use, like open string cycle, and just things that are just wonderful that you can do so many things with. I started writing when doing arrangements because I thought, well, way back then, it was like in the dark ages, there was not much out there. The literature was really thin. And so I would hear pieces that I loved, and I thought, our students, you know, they would just get so inspired if I could make this playable for them. That was my first inspiration to start arranging and composing. And so that just kind of got me off on that writing, but it was all hand in hand with my teaching because, like I said, I would hear a piece and I'd say, the kids would love this. Let me make it, you know, so that it's playable for them. And I also, we would use, back to 4th and 5th grade, we like to not only use the method book, but we like to introduce the Suzuki and make it work for all 4 instruments because it was. And I also, we would use, good. But the Suzuki gives them something melodic, you know, really interesting for each instrument that they could use, you know, to play solos. So when they get to 6th grade, other than the methods, we would also require them to play a solo at the end of every term so that we could make sure they weren't hiding in the back of the section and not getting there. But we would always use scales. You know, in 6th grade, we got the Essentials for Strings scale book, and we used that. We used the rhythm exercises in there to work on that. Essentials for Strings, Gerald Anderson, I believe. And one thing I like to do in my elementary, though, I would like to warm up with something, you know, by rote. And then I would say, okay, let's do a drill. And I would say, okay, let's do this. Put your fingers down, you know, let's do this rhythm, pepperoni pizza, rest. Just drill kind of stuff. And then put the book there, and then they add another part of the learning where you're reading and your fingers are, everything's combined to work together. Nathan, do you have any questions, or do you want to add to that?
No, well, we've got about 2-ish minutes if anyone wants to weigh in. And I'm wondering if any of our guests who haven't spoken yet want to talk about how, like a method book, for example, what's the significance of picking a particular method book when we're thinking about our missions and our models and our communities? What is the significance of picking, in particular, a method book? How significant can that choice be? Is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet that would like to weigh in?
I guess I could. This is Denise. I actually picked sometimes 2 or 3 method books to use because you can't find a perfect method book. I'm sorry to the people that write method books, but there's so much that plays into what your students can do and when you start them, how often you meet and everything. So, and then you have a wide range of students in your class. So you choose method books that address all of that. And then I would sequence the 2 or 3 method books, like here's an exercise in this book, and then here's some supplementary ones in this book that are a little easier. And then when you go to assess the students, you give them choice. Like, here are the 3 or 4 that you can pick from. They're different levels. And then the students have that choice and they feel comfortable performing. And you're also giving them extra things if they need, if they're already understanding it, you try to give them a challenge. And if they're struggling a little bit, you can give them some extra time to practice some other exercises in the other book.
Well, I think in choosing a method book, just one thing, there are some that are more spread out and big notes and much easier for like a 4th grader to work with. Whereas if you start in the 6th grade, you can use something that's not quite as spread out. So that was one of our things to think about when we were choosing a method book to use.
And you mean the visual element of how
Absolutely.
big the notes are on the
page? Yes,
because
okay. It helps so much with beginning note reading for students.
I'll weigh in on that just real quickly as someone that writes those books. So, you know, all the method books are written with this in mind. This is always the goal of the writer, is to write something that will work for the mass majority of people across the country. And the challenge with that is we're not a unified group. We start as early as kindergarten. We start as late as high school in this country. We meet as infrequently as 20 minutes a week and as often as an hour plus every day.
Absolutely.
So it's a very challenging thing to do. I don't think there's an author, a method book author on the planet that if they were writing the book for themselves, for their own kids, would write the book that they wrote. So there's a lot of averaging going on in those books. And I think if you look at the most successful ones, if you listed the top 4 or 5 most successful books, you will find that they are incredibly similar to each other. And there's a reason for that. It has to do with the pace, a lot of factors. There's a lot of factors that are very identifiable. But I think you'll find that that's the challenge with method books. And I will just share this with you very quickly. One time, a lady submitted to me the perfect method book, and she had taken different lines out of the main 6 or 7 method books in publication and taped them together and submitted that and said, "Here, I want you to publish this. This is my perfect method book that I've written." And we had to explain to her a little bit about copyright, that wasn't really going to fly, that we can't really just do that and put her name on it. But I wrote her a very polite letter and explained copyright. So anyway.
Well, this, what you were saying, Bob, segues great into the next question. And queued up next to speak on point here, we have Bob Phillips and Dr. Lissandra Booth. Bob, why don't you go first, since you were just talking? The question is, how should your mission and your model inform your selection of the instructional methods and materials?
Okay. So I'm Bob Phillips. I taught 512 Orchestra for 27 years in Saline. I spent 15 years as the orchestra editor at Alfred Publishing and have been writing music and books for Alfred for about 25 years now. And at age 67, I will tell you, I have spent the last 3 months doing a long-term sub job teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade orchestra, and that in a situation that meets every day. So it's been really fascinating to jump back in at 67. So I would say this, and I'm going to address several things all at once here. I think our broad mission is to help students develop a lifelong appreciation, relationship, and participation with music through listening, playing, and creating. In order to include all children, they should experience, I think, a wide variety of genres and creators. We should help them to learn to access music both orally and via literacy. The goal is not to select music that makes them comfortable, as art is not always meant to be comfortable in terms of performance music. Students should be taught to understand music in its historical context as seen through a contemporary lens. There isn't time for them to experience everything, but we can help them develop the skills and tools to be musical explorers so they can find their own path. Instruments really are a chosen second voice, and instrumental pedagogical materials can get to the same endpoint via many different routes. That's the beauty of American teaching. We all do it differently, but we can get to the same endpoint. Materials serve the greater mission of allowing students to participate in the creation and recreation of music. The advantage of written, visual, or oral materials is that it saves time for the teacher, allowing them to interact with students, but also brings structure to the process. I also think, though, it's important for us to stay focused on the mission and goals. Materials are just a tool that can help. The bottom line is that materials are not the curriculum. They just help accomplish it. I always ask myself, will these materials help my students achieve my and their goals? It's easy to fall into the trap of teaching too much and too fast. We also need our materials to allow for differentiation so all students can succeed no matter what kind of learner they are. So how does our model inform our selection of materials? First of all, I believe in the power of large group instruction. Without it, music in the schools would be financially unsustainable. Our current model of bands, orchestras, and choirs with resulting subsets, marching band, fiddle group, whatever it is, jazz bands, has been an incredible success story in most ways. The model doesn't need to be thrown out. It just needs to be tweaked and improved. The problem is not the model, but what we do with it. To me, the problem with the current model is it currently relies on literacy as the main access point. We need to spend much more time teaching orally. This is what opens up the vast majority of music in the world. The problem with literacy is we spend too much time specializing. I play the viola part, so I'm really good at playing inner harmony lines with accompaniment type rhythms. Instead, I think all students should learn to play the melody, harmony parts, bass lines, as well as improvise and compose, and in essence, become functional musicians. We also need to spend more of our time resources on the social emotional learning part of music. After all, that's why we love to play music. It means something to us. I always ask myself the desert island question. If my 8 years with the kids will be their only experience in music, what music should we learn and why? In the current model, you may have 3 concerts a year for 8 years, so 24 concerts, where if they played 4 pieces per concert, that's a total of 96 pieces in their entire educational experience. That might range from very easy to the first few years to more advanced later on. So if I'm picking 96 pieces to introduce to them, what do I pick and why? The challenge is our curriculum is wide, and most of us would be hard-pressed to pick 96 pieces that represent everything it includes. So I circle back to that we need to focus on helping them develop the skills and tools to become musical explorers. I want students that are self-learners and curious. I want them to be able to learn orally and visually, and to be able to improvise and compose. Most importantly, I want them to discover meaning in music, whatever form that takes and however that looks for them. And the last thing I would add to this is a daunting task for all of us as educators. Don't let the fear of trying to do everything prevent you from doing what you can. It's a very daunting task, materials and methods, and because you look at the broad curriculum and mission. So there's my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Bob. Let's pass it off to Dr. Lissandra Booth. Please introduce yourself, and back to question number 2. How should your mission and model inform your selection of instructional methods and materials?
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be on this great panel with all of my esteemed colleagues. I see a lot of comments coming up for us to really talk about the methods and materials, for us to really get to the point. So before I even introduce myself, I want those of you out there that are writing the comments, go ahead and send me your mission. I want to see what your mission is. And as you are writing your comments, I'll tell you a little bit about who I am. I am Lissandra Booth. I am the executive founder and director of the Wake Forest Community Youth Orchestra in Wake Forest, North Carolina, where we serve over 350 students across Wake County, Franklin County, and Vance counties in North Carolina. I bring you greetings from the ancestral lands of the Tuscarora and Catawba Nations here in Wake Forest. Needless to say, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the methods and materials that I use specifically, and I will tell you why. When we talk about a mission is a specific task to which a person or group is charged. So as a teacher, as an orchestra director, as a youth orchestra director, thank you so much for your comment. So as a youth orchestra director, you have to know what your mission is. I can just say for me personally, one of my missions is to give students their history. When we look into the method books, we don't often see any reference to minorities or diversity in many of these method books. I will tell you one that I feel is that we use in the youth orchestra, and I'm also a public school teacher, 18 years, I'm national board certified in orchestra. But for the past 18 years that I've taught, I've always had to go into a method book and rearrange the backtrack to fit my students' interests and to fit their diversity and to fit their cultural heritage. So I feel that my mission, one, is my what, and my model is my how. My model is how am I going to teach students their history through the music that I select. So yes, I'm going to teach them that there were African Americans that composed during Mozart's time. and that's what they're going to get from me. At least 60% of my repertoire that I select is by BIPOC composers, Black, Indigenous, people of color. At least 20% of what I program is of women, and one of these women at the top of my list is Deborah Baker Monday. Her Jupiter, we got that on YouTube. Sorry if it's copywritten, but we love it. Her Conquistador, my kids love that. So a lot of the music that I program, Cheryl Atwell, Drift, Rhythm 6. So these are the things that, if we say meet students where they are, so that a lot of my students, a lot of the work that I do is in rural and underserved communities. So we know that the gospelized backtrack, they love that. So I'll take Twinkle Twinkle, which is number 43 out of the Essential Elements book, 2000. And I'll make a twinkle, twinkle, little star. I'll put some kind of gospelized where they're playing. We change the rhythm so it's elevated. So now we're putting thank you so much, Stephen, for that. Very good. Thank you so much for your mission. So we're putting what students are interested in. We're making it culturally relevant. So because I'm giving students a bit of their history, that's one of my personal missions, to give them their history, to give them their culture, to bring in, diverse elements into the materials that are given. I think that's one of the most important things that we can do. So, for so long, we've allowed the music to dictate what our mission is. We've looked at the repertoire list. We looked at the festival list. We've selected, okay, this is grade 3, this is grade 5. We're going to get a high score here when we go to contest. And we've let that drive our, our mission. But now it's time for us to flip it. Find out who we are first as a teacher. What is your mission? Not what the school's mission is. What is your mission as an orchestra teacher? What is the mission to help the students that you serve? And then let that drive your model.
Thank you. So that you are just dinging all kinds of bells for me, Dr. Booth. And as someone who is a younger teacher myself, I'm on year 7. The first couple years teaching, I'm sure many of us have experienced this, is we're right out of a teacher training program and we're thinking meeting expectations and showing up at contests, winning contests, getting ones. And then it doesn't work that way. And the kids don't really care unless you are in like this super high expectations program and you're taking over for someone who's just retired, that was the expectation for them. But really the kids want to make music with each other. And they want to make music that is relevant to them. And part of what we're trying to do with this discussion is how do we find materials that are relevant for our students, that has meaning for these kids. And I was listening yesterday to the funeral of Prince Philip. They played the hymn from Jupiter. And I was just reflecting in this conversation on my first experience with that piece of music was because Deborah Baker Monday thought kids need to have an experience with this piece of music. And now every time I hear that piece of music, I remember that there was somebody that thought that was important for me to learn. But that was in my community where I live. And the students that I teach have a very different experience as young people than I had as a student. So moving ahead, let's hear from Denise next. And the question is, how does a teacher stay abreast of emergent and contemporary instructional methods as we're having this conversation about how do we keep the materials relevant for our students?
Okay, well, I'll introduce myself real quick. I'm from Fargo, North Dakota. I taught middle school, 5th through 9th graders for 30 years, 35 years, no, 30 years. And then I became the performing arts curriculum specialist. I've also been president of NAfME and been involved with ASTA. And so right there explains a lot of how you stay abreast of what's new and what's relevant. First of all, I'm a firm believer in taking advantage of every professional development opportunity you can, and that includes things that happen at school. For example, I had to go to a literacy conference one year because they didn't realize we don't teach literacy, and they just made everybody go. But I learned a lot about how to teach my kids vocabulary, what kind of exercises I can do to help them. I had to take a lot of courses one time to renew my teaching certificate that involved John Feierabend and Kodai. And he changed my life as a teacher, just thinking about how I approach music. And I've gone to a lot of ORF conference sessions, and all of those things together made me the teacher that I was, because of just looking at things differently. And I think if you do that, you're going to open your mind to just being a better teacher. There's a lot of Facebook groups out there, this being one of them. There's an ASTA one. There's thousands of teachers on different, there's teaching during COVID times. You know, just think of a topic and Google it and you'll find some Facebook groups. If you're a singleton in your district, I really believe in mentorship. So if you don't know a lot of people that teach the same thing you teach, and you need some help and guidance, if you're a newer teacher or if you're a veteran teacher that just is struggling with something, seek out people maybe within your region or your state that you can just, now we have the opportunity for Zoom meetings that you can meet very easily and just throw out ideas. We have professional learning community meetings in our district every week, and that was a really great opportunity for people to say, hey, I'm doing this in my class, it worked well, I'm doing this, I'm struggling, and how can I just learned so much just listening to all the teachers talk about things as they were just sharing ideas. Going to conferences, national, state, regional workshops within your community. You are going to, maybe you're not going to use everything. Maybe you can't use everything that first day. I know everybody says if you can take home one thing after a conference and use it on Monday, you've been successful. But I think my first conference I ever went to was probably a national ASTA conference, and I took copious notes. I went back to my room and typed them up, and that was my way to process all of the things that I learned. And those things stayed with me forever just because I did those couple of steps. And then build relationships with those people that you see at conferences. Again, there's somebody you can connect with and somebody you can share ideas and ask questions of. My mission as a teacher is to teach all students. And so we really need to know who are the composers out there today. We need to know what our students are capable of. We need to know what their interests are, what their backgrounds are, what their cultures are. I taught in a community that was a refugee resettlement place, and I could see when I was the performing arts curriculum specialist that we weren't really connecting with students anymore. And so it's like, how do you get to know those students? What can they bring to your classroom? What kind of music they can bring to your classroom and share? How you can tap into various cultures and history. And my goal towards the end of teaching was to maybe just have one last concert and really take the music we were learning, learn about the history, learn about the culture. Let's take Shaker Hymn, for example. There's a lot you can learn about the culture, the history, the products they produce. And by doing that, the students really got to know that piece of music a whole lot better. And a lot of times we did that before we ever learned the piece. So they learned about all the things about the piece, the culture, the history before they even played it. And they played it with a much different passion than they would have just sight reading it. So those are some things I would recommend.
All right. Thank you so much, Denise. Now we're going to move on. Same question. Let's turn it over to Joe Divic, someone that I saw coming in sort of this huge turnover in the early 2000s, kind of the new guard of orchestra teachers and a whole different set of materials that started to be used. So I'm really looking forward to Joe's response to this question of how do we stay abreast of new instructional methods and materials.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. My name is Joe Divic. I teach orchestra at Olympia High School in Olympia, Washington. That's 60% of my job. The other 40% is as music and visual arts coordinator in the Olympia School District. And I also taught middle school strings and elementary strings here in Olympia for a long time. This is somewhere in my 21st year of teaching, somewhere in there. all in Western Washington. First of all, just listening to Denise's answer, I've got bullet points right here, and she's just checking off bullet point on my list. It's a great response to the question from her. So I thought I might take a few minutes. I wanted to talk a bit of just how great it was here to hear Deborah talk about teaching by rote in her method books and her warm-ups, hearing Bob talk about the need to develop oral skills, and hearing Dr. Booth talk about needing to make changes to the accompaniment tracks to match the interests of her students. And when people ask about method books and talk about those teaching methods, I look at those method books as almost as like it's a guide that you as the teacher can use to check in with for making sure you're hitting on the skills that you want to teach. And if you run out of ideas, there's ideas that you can teach by rote, and just to help guide the teacher. And I think the other big part of that is so many times I see young teachers or even older teachers wanting to teach a new technique or skill and then trying to teach it straight from the method book, like introduce this new concept, this new thing on the instrument, this new mechanic that you have to do. Oh, and we're going to make you read this new thing at the same time. And so using those method books, not as a, hey, everybody, let's turn the page and learn about low second finger, and then having a lecture on and reading about it, but rather taking them through rote exercises. Then once they've figured it out how to play it, then taking it, now that's what that looks like on the page when a composer wants to communicate with literacy that musical idea. So it was great to hear those three ideas, because that's something I feel very strongly about. So thank you for that, everyone. I'd say the things I'd like to add to what Denise was saying is that when I've got, developing a network on my bullet points, be active in in-service activities, develop mentors. One thing I think that we need to be careful about is when we go to these in-services is staying humble about our thinking about what we know about a subject. So I don't think any one of us will fully understand the work of past master pedagogues and the mechanics of how the instrument and our bodies interact. And so thinking about the scope and sequence and the sequencing of people like Boronoff and Paul Roland and Suzuki, and even going further back in time, Schrodiak and all those folks. And I don't think any one of us will ever really fully understand all those concepts. So when we go to a session or when we go to a conference and we see a session title and we're like, oh, I've seen that one before. Anytime I've gone to a session where I've seen that one before, I always come out of it with a deeper understanding of what I knew before and a new tidbit on how that presenter attacks that issue. So I think when it comes to staying abreast of emergent and contemporary methods is, one, understanding that we're never going to fully master the old methods and approaching it with that humility. Because there's always something new, some new idea of presenting it that somebody's going to give. And so really taking advantage of that resource. When we're seeking out other trends in education and current events, I think, one thing for me, I am white, cis male, and I grew up in a very middle-class white neighborhood. All my teaching jobs have been in very non-diverse teaching situations. So when we have these current events of talking about, and we're addressing these as a whole in our school, that's decolonizing the music curriculum, what is white supremacy culture, what is culturally responsive teaching. These are things that in my 45-year-old life, in my upbringing, are just like, I don't even know what we're talking about. So I think one of the keys to staying abreast of all what's contemporary and what's emergent is understanding our own backgrounds and humbly learning like what these terms even mean, and how making sure that we're growing more aware of ourselves, more aware of what our students need. So at the last ASTA conference, I went and saw a session on decolonizing the music curriculum, and because I'm not even sure exactly what that means. And this presenter gave a great session and was talking about the Suzuki method. And I'm a strong advocate for the Suzuki method. I've raised my children in Suzuki violin lessons. I've done the Suzuki parent thing. My wife has done the Suzuki training. And one of her premises in this presentation was the articulation skills that are book 1 and book 2 Suzuki materials. They prepare us very well for stopped bows. They prepare us very well for a certain kind of articulation and music making. And her premise was making sure that we understand when we prepare kids for that, we might leave them with a deficit for different styles of music. So making sure as we are working through the skills we're teaching, making sure that we're not over prioritizing one skill, and then ultimately turning these skills and mechanics of the instrument into the abstract tools for expression. So when we're talking, we need to be able to stop the bow, but we also need to be able to have legato bow strokes. We need to be able to see and teach to how all these different articulations, how these different concepts can be used to manipulate the instrument for prepare kids for all these different styles. So that's like what's fresh on my mind as a 20-year veteran teacher, and how just raising my awareness of how these materials work and how they fit into making sure that when I'm preparing kids technically, that I'm preparing them for being able to approach all different styles of music with their string instruments. So that's what I have to say about that. Thanks.
All right. Well, we've got enough time to kind of circle back and give everybody their last word on the topic of methods and materials. And as we're bringing up in the comments here, this conversation is really the why. Like, why do we choose the materials we choose, and how does that selection process work? As we're thinking about the previous 2 episodes, mission and model. So let's just go back in order. Geraldine, give us your last word.
Okay, well, my last word was sponsored by Joe. So Joe, thanks for saying what you were saying about colonization. And I've been thinking about this, Bob's 96 pieces. And I was thinking, there is no way as one person with one lived experience that I can choose 96 pieces without having my own bias and my own colonization come into that process. I have to reach out to other people, and I have to network and find people who know more about things than I do, because I can't possibly know everything. I'm married to a librarian, and I read recently, I think it was in the Midnight Library, it said a librarian is a search engine with a soul. And that's very true of my wife, but also we have to be those search engines with souls. And if we don't have the answer, we look to other people for the answer, and we provide the resources to the students or whoever's asking, so that we don't, again, just keep pushing our own agenda, however, pious we think it might be. We've got to reach out and network. And I just am really appreciative of all of you for organizing this event. I attended the first 2 and left just filled with ideas and so excited to go back to work. So thank you for all that.
Thank you, Geraldine. We all know how easy it is to be an island of orchestra teacher, especially if you're the only orchestra teacher in your whole school district. Let's move on. Last word from Deborah.
Oh, all right. I wanted to say, yes, Bob, the 96 pieces that's so big, but as we go year to year, you have to take the the student population that you have there, and choose literature that will engage the kids, and just, you want to make them fall in love and just love to come to orchestra every day. Also, about teaching the good technique. I believe in teaching the proper technique and really making sure that you conquer that before we say, okay, well, let's start sliding our finger and let's start, adding the other techniques. I mean, make sure that they have really good technical skills down, and then absolutely explore so many different styles that demand different ways of playing. Then also, let me see. Oh, and Denise, as for you, I think the first national convention I went to, it was the MENC in Phoenix in the 90s, mid-90s. Bob, you were there. It's the first time I saw Bob's. He did a clinic on teaching large heterogeneous classes. He had some things that we took home, and it was just amazing. So get out to those MEAs, get to the national, and then now we have this wonderful social network for this, the good things about social network in this place. So thanks for having me.
All right, Bob, last word.
As I started teaching improvisation and a wide variety of eclectic styles, that what we call eclectic styles now, I started this in the 70s and had a very extensive improvisation / eclectic styles program in my orchestra program. What I discovered with materials is there's a certain amount of it you got to write yourself, do yourself. There's also, the only thing that ever held kids back was me. It was my lack of vision, imagination, so on and so forth. And from that experience, I had students that literally have become some of the great jazz players in the United States, some of the great fiddle players, because I opened up a door for them. And even though it wasn't necessarily always my world, it became their world.
Thank you, Bob. Last word from Lissandra.
I would just recommend to everybody, never underestimate the power of observation. Through observation, you could really learn, and I mean, observing another teacher, you could really learn some things to keep you abreast of what's happening out there, even outside of music. I know when I taught at the high school some years ago, the Vietnamese population, there was such a large Vietnamese population. We did a Black History Month. I said, well, why don't we make a Vietnamese month? Why don't we make it a Vietnamese History Month? And for the concerts, I got a ao dai from Vietnam that one of the parents had made. So there are many different things we can do that you're going to find not written in a textbook. But if you really want to know, reach out and observe. If you're a singleton in your district, hey, you can call me, email me, Facebook me, DM me. There are many, and I'm sure all of my colleagues would say, DM us if you would like to observe one of our rehearsals, so that you can always, stay abreast. And always remember, you don't need permission to do the mission that you were called to do. You don't need anybody's permission. Think outside the box and do everything to the best of your ability in the spirit of excellence.
I love it. Last word from Denise.
Well, first of all, thank you for putting this panel together and all the great advice that everybody has given today. It's you are all truly amazing. A couple things. I mentioned student voice and choice before, and I think getting to know your students, assessing their abilities, looking at what their interests are, getting input from them constantly, letting them have some control over maybe, putting a concert together. This all ties into them wanting to stay in your group and stay in music, and they love music. And then tie into other, I know this is from the 99 standards, but tie into other subject areas, because these kids are multi-arts talented. And so just for an example, I have a student, we wrote kind of our own script to a piece of music that was probably, the plot was not appropriate for that age level, so they wrote their own script. But one of my 9th graders wrote the most beautiful love story. It made me cry. Other kids, we did cartoons of the story, and We've even danced to one of Bob Phillips' tunes. And so, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do that tie their other arts and passions into orchestra. And so selecting literature and then choosing what to do with it makes a huge difference in them running to your class the next day and saying, what are we going to learn today?
We're going to move on to last word from Joe. Thank you so much, Denise. But that is definitely a question I hope we can talk about in the Zoom session coming up. Is why don't we have beginning strings at the high school level? And if we do, how do we do that differently than starting a fourth grader or a third grader? But let's have last word from Joe, and then please join us over on the Zoom for a private discussion where we can get some more pointed questions answered for the viewers.
Well, thank you, Nathan. Yeah, I don't really have any last words. You know, I was able to, in my time, sum up some other observations from the other prompts, and then share my thoughts on my prompts. So I'd be happy to just encourage people to show up for the Zoom here in the 2 o'clock hour, and continue the conversation.
All righty. With that, I think it's time to end this portion of the meeting, and we'll meet you all over on Zoom for a closed discussion where our viewers can interact with this amazing group of panelists and ask some pointed questions. The chat was pretty active for this one. That's always a good thing, an active chat. And it seems like we're going to be able to make some real progress here for this topic. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and I'll see you over at the Zoom.